In this video, I'm going to teach you how to deploy a Django project with a Postgresql database for free to render. Now, I'm just going to show you the projects that I am going to be deploying. So this is a very simple project that just displays a list of books along with their authors. Now, I can add those books from the admin dashboard, and this is also the model. So this is a very simple and very basic project that I'm going to be deploying. Now, the first thing that we need to do is ensure that we have a render account. So if you don't already have a render account, I want you to go to render.com, create your account, and then log in. Now, after logging in, the next step that we need to take is we need to create a database that we're actually going to be making use of. So I want you to click this new button and then scroll down all the way to Postgres and click Postgres. So we're just going to be creating a new instance of a Postgres database. The first thing that we need to specify is the name of the database. I will just call this tutorial_YouTube. You can give it whatever name you want. Now, we don't really have to worry about the database. We don't really have to worry about this field. But if you want to fill them, you can go ahead. We can also leave region as Oregon. And for the Postgres version, you can choose whatever version you want. But I think it's just good practice to go with the latest version. Or if you have a specific need, you can pick whatever version you want. But I'll leave it as 16, which is the latest. We can ignore Datadog API. And now for the instance type, since we're going to be deploying all this for free, I'm just going to click the free instance. Now, I would encourage you to read this information right here. It shows you the downsides to using a free instance. So after clicking free, that is pretty much all we need to do to create database. So just go ahead and click create database, and that's going to create a new instance for us. Now we are going to have to wait a short while for the instance to get created. So I'm just going to pause here and resume when it has been fully created. Okay, so right now the status of our database says available, so we can proceed to the next step. Now the next step is that we need to actually connect to this database. But in order to do that, we need to install a specific library called dj database URL. So I want you to run the command in your command line, pip install dj-database URL. So once you run this, it's just going to install dj database URL for us. And we're going to be making use of this library to connect to our Postgres database instance. So for me, it said the requirement already satisfied because I already have this library installed in my virtual environment. So I'm just going to clear out my screen right now. Now the next step we need to take is that we need to head to the settings.py file inside projects folder. So I'm going to head to my projects folder and open the settings.py file. Let me close down my terminal. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to import dj database URL. So type import dj database URL. Now after doing that, the next step is that we now actually need to connect to the database. So I want you to scroll down to where you see databases. Now we're just going to add a different database aside the default SQLite that we have. What we need to say is databases, and in here we're going to pass in default. So when we put in our database here, our project is just going to default to whatever database that we are specifying as the default. So what we now need to do here is that we need to call dj database URL dot pass. Now after calling dot pass, we need to head to our database instance, scroll down and copy the external database URL. Now we are going to be making use of the internal database URL later, but for now, just copy the external database URL, and in here, I want you to paste it in. So once you paste that in and you save it, let's head back to our server and notice what is happening. So if you head to your server, you'll notice that it says improperly configured, error loading CyclePG or CyclePG module. Now, this is because we need to install the Postgres driver, and we haven't installed it yet. So in order to get rid of this error, what we need to do is install the Postgres driver library. So let's just break out of the terminal. And once we break out of this terminal, what we just need to run is pip install CyclePG2. So psy cyclepg2 -binary. So if you have this error, I want you to just run the command pip install cyclepg2 -binary. If that doesn't work, just run the command pip install cyclepg and that could work. So now that the library has installed, I'm just going to clear my screen and run my server again. I'll say python manage.py run server. Now once I run this command, the server should run without any errors. So as you can see now, my server is running without any errors. But you'll notice that it says you have 19 unapplied migrations. Now this is happening because I had specified that I want my default database to be the database that I had just created on render. So since I connected to a new database, all the tables that I had created, for example, my model in my core app, this table doesn't exist in my new database. So Django is telling me that, okay, you have connected to a new database and then you have all these unapplied migrations. So in order to just take care of this issue, what I just need to do is I'm going to open my terminal in VS Code and I'm going to run migrate. I'm going to say python manage.py migrate. Now, before I run that command, I want to show you something. If I head over to the database, you can see that it says 0.76% used out of 1 gigabyte because we get 1 gigabyte for a free database instance. But once I run this migrate command, what Django is going to do is it's going to create the tables for us in a remote PostgreSQL database. So I am just going to pause here and wait for it to apply all those migrations. So as you can see, the migrations have started applying. So right now, all the migrations have been applied to my database table. Now, if I come to my render dashboard and I go to the database, once I refresh right now, I should see that the storage that has been used up has increased. As you can see, it says 4.87% used out of 1 gigabyte. So you can see that when we migrated, the database tables were created in this Postgres database, and the storage that had been used increased. So the next step that we need to take right now is I'm just going to show you that the migration worked. So if I refresh my homepage right now, I shouldn't see any books because those books that I had before were coming from my database, from my local database. So what I just need to do right now to create books in my admin dashboard is that I need to create a super user. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a super user because if I try to refresh right now, I am currently logged in as a super user, but that super user account doesn't exist in the remote database online. So I need to create a super user right now. I'm going to run the command python manage.py create super user. I'm going to put in admin as a username, and for the email, I'll just leave that empty. I'll put in my password, and once I do that, I should see that my super user has been created successfully. So the next step now is that we need to now head back to our render dashboard. Now, what we need to do next is that we need to create a new web service. Now, the new web service is where we are actually now going to host our Django project. So I want you to click new and select web service. So it's going to ask us how we would like to deploy our web service. So we're going to deploy the web service through a GitHub repository. So I want to just leave it as build and deploy from a Git repository. So click next. Now, once you click next, you are going to be brought to this page. Now, if you hadn't already connected your GitHub repository to your render account, you should do that right now. And there will be a button that will probably say connect repository. So once you connect your, that will say connect GitHub. So once you connect your GitHub account, you have access to all the repositories that exist in your GitHub account, and you can just directly connect to them. So if you haven't already connected, I want you to connect to I want you to connect your GitHub account to your render account. Now, I'm sure you are going to ask that, okay, we are going to be deploying through GitHub, but we don't actually have a Git repository created yet. So I want you to head over to your GitHub account and I want you to create a new repository. So I'm just going to click new. Now, once I click new, I am going to give it a name of render-deployment. Now, you can give the repository whatever name you want, but I'm going to name mine render deployment. I'm going to leave the description as, I'm going to leave it empty, and I'll set it as public. And I'll just create this repository. So once I create this repository right now, the next step is that we need to now take all the code that we've written and put it into this repository so that we can connect to this repository from our render account. So I want you to head back to your code, as there are a few things that we need to actually do for pushing our code to GitHub. Now, the first thing that we need to do is that we need to set up environment variables. Now, we don't just want to push all our code with sensitive information. For example, our secret key, and also another example of sensitive information is our database URL. Because if we push it to GitHub and anybody has access to this repository, it means they can see all our secret private data. And if you are building a serious project, and let's say you have, for example, PayPal or Stripe integration, you are going to be having your secret keys and your private keys in your settings.py file, and we want to hide those details before we push to GitHub. So what we need to do is that we need to set up environment variables. So the first thing that I want you to do is install a library called Python-Decouple. So run the command pip install Python-Decouple, Decouple. So we're going to be making use of this library to set up environment variables in our Django project. So now that we have Python-Decouple installed, what we need to do next is that we need to create an env file in our root directory. So head over to your root directory. Your root directory is where you have your manage.py file, and create a new file .env. Now, inside this env file is where we are going to be keeping all our secrets, all our private data that we don't want to expose. The next thing that we need to do is we need to create a different file called gitignore.gitignore. So for example, what we want to do is that we want to prevent all our sensitive data from being seen online. So when we are making changes and pushing our code to GitHub, we want to tell GitHub to ignore this .env file because it contains all our sensitive information. So inside the gitignore, just type .env. Now the next step that we need to take is that we now need to actually start selecting all the sensitive information that we are trying to hide. So what we need to do is, the first data that I'm going to hide is my Django secret key. So I'm just going to copy my Django secret key, and I am going to go over to my env file, and I'll type secrets_key, and I'm going to equate it to my Django secret key. Now note how there is no space between the equal to sign and the actual value. That is intentional, and there shouldn't be any space between the equality symbol and the value we are trying to equate this to. Now, after taking the secret key, I also want to hide my debug status. So I'm just going to get that, and I'm going to come down and set my debug. I'll type debug is equals to that, true, and I'll save my env file. Now, the last thing that we need to hide is the database URL. So I'm just going to come down and copy my database URL because I would like to hide the value. Go to my env file, and I'll type database URL, and I will equate this to my database URL. Now, once you save this, head back to your settings.py file, and we need to make an import. So I'm going to say from decouple, which is the library that we had just installed. From decouple, import config. So after importing config, the next thing that we need to do is we now actually need to start referencing these items that we are trying to hide from our environment variable file. So how do we do that? I'm going to say my secret key is equals to config, and once I type config, I can just directly access the value from my environment variable using this placeholder. Now I'll explain what I mean. So I can just directly say secret key is equals to config, and in here I can pass in secret underscore key. So what this is going to do is it's going to look for a variable that matches a variable name, sorry, that matches the placeholder or specifier that I passed into this quote. So for example, if this was variable, if this was secret underscore key underscore, I would have to come here and also add a trailing underscore. So whatever value whatever variable name you give must also match the value that you pass into this parenthesis right here. So I can do the same also for my debug. I can just copy this and I'm going to paste that. And instead of secret key, I'll rename this to debug. Now, there's also something that we need to take note of. When using the decouple library, we need to specify what kind of data type we're trying to pass in. So because the debug value is a boolean, it's either true or false. We need to specify that we are trying to call a boolean value. Because if we don't specify it, what it's going to do is it's going to set debug to, I'm just going to show you what it's going to look like. It's going to set it to true as a string. By default, when we don't specify the data type, it's going to get all the environment variable values as strings. So we need to specify what we are importing and we need to specify the data type. So after saying debug, I'm going to put a comma and I'll say cast is equals to bool. So for example, if I wanted to hide a value of, let's say, age, and I want to set age here, age to, let's say, 56. What I will simply do is I am going to also type config and ig, and I'm going to pass in age, and what I'll now say is cast is equals to int. So this is if I wanted to get the age value from my environment variable, which is an integer. So that is why we need to specify what cast is. So I'm just going to delete this because I don't need this value. So debug is true. Yes. So the next thing that I will actually like to also hide is my allowed host. Now the allowed host is supposed to be a list of domains that can serve my Django or our Django project. So I'm just going to copy that and come to my env file. Now the next thing I'm going to specify is allowed host, and I'm going to equate it to localhost right now. So I will just scroll and copy localhost domain. Now I want you to note that you shouldn't include HTTP or HTTPS. So I'm just going to put that and put a comma. Now I'm going to explain why we're doing this. But for now, just save that file and head back to your settings.py. So I'm just going to type config right here and config, and I'm going to open my quotes and I'm going to paste allowed hosts. Allowed hosts. Now I'm going to call the dot split. The dot split string method. Now the reason why I am doing this is because the allowed host setting is supposed to be equated to a list of domains which can serve our Django project. Now in my .env file, I had already put localhost and I put a comma. So it would mean that in production, we can put as many domains as we want. But once we come to the settings.py file, it's going to get those domains from the environment variable, and it is going to split them using the comma separator. Now, once it splits them, it's going to put them into a list. I'm sure you understand how the split string method works. So it's just going to split this string into a list. So it's going to get all the allowed host values here as a string, and it's going to split it using the comma separator. So it's still going to be a list. Now, the last thing that we need to specify is the database URL. I'm just going to come here and type config also. I'm just going to come here and copy the database URL. So once I paste that in, that should be all we need to do in terms of setting up our environment variable. So let's just head back to the settings.py file and sorry, head back to the terminal and run the project again. I'm going to say python manage.py run server. Now, if the configuration is properly set up, we shouldn't get any error in the terminal. So you can see everything is running perfectly. So we have set up our environment variables properly. Now, the next step that we need to take after setting up the environment variable is that we need to push all these changes to GitHub. But before we push all these changes to GitHub, there is a specific file that we need, which is important, and that file is called the requirements file. And what we're going to do is we're going to create this file, and inside that file, we're just going to save all the libraries that we have used in our project. So that's when we deploy to render, render knows the proper libraries to install in order for our projects to run smoothly. So I'm going to first of all install a library called Gunicorn. So I'll run pip install Gunicorn. Gunicorn. So once our Gunicorn installs, we are going to create the requirements file. So after Gunicorn has installed, I'm just going to run a command which is going to save all the libraries that exist in this virtual environment. It's going to take all those libraries and save it to our requirements file. So I'll run pip freeze space angle brackets requirements .txt. So it's going to take all the requirements and save them to a text file. And if you go back to our Django project or to the file explorer or file window and open the requirements file, you can see it's just a list of all the libraries that have been used inside this virtual environment. So after installing all these requirements, what we now simply need to do is push this code to GitHub. Now, I'm just going to do this the easy way. I'm going to come over to the repository which we had created earlier, and I'm going to click on upload an existing file. Now, once I click that, I'm just going to drag and drop all the files inside, I'm just going to drag and drop all the files inside my project folder. All the files except my env file, and I'm just going to copy them and drag them over to this box right here. So I'm going to upload all the files via drag and drop, and I am not going to be using the Git terminal. But for you, I want you to feel free to push to GitHub if you want to use the terminal. So after all the files have uploaded, I'll just scroll down and put in a commit. I'll call it first commit or something like that. I'm going to click commit changes. Now, please note that I remember that you could also push this code to GitHub using your command line or using the terminal. I am going to assume that you already have the basic knowledge of pushing code to GitHub. Now that we have all our code in this specific repository called render deployment, we can then go back to our render dashboard. Now remember that we had connected our GitHub account. So what we now simply need to do is search for this repository that we had just created, and we need to connect to that specific repository. So I'm just going to refresh my dashboard so that the new repository can reflect. So when that refreshes, I'm just going to come over here, and you can see that render deployment is already showing. So I am going to hit connect. So once I hit connect, you can decide to change this name. I'm just going to call this MENT to fix the spelling error. Now you can leave the other things by default. You can leave the region as Oregon by default, and the branch, if you have multiple branches in your repository, you can decide to choose whatever branch you want to deploy from. But for me, I'm going to deploy from the main branch. So you can just leave root directory empty. You can leave you can leave that empty. Now for the runtime, since we are using Python 3, since it's a Django project and we're making use of Python, just select Python 3 and leave it like that. Then for the build command, you can see that it's in this is already there by default, pip install -r requirements.txt. So that is why we had to create this requirements file, so that render knows what specific libraries to install. Now we need to specify the start command. For the start command, I just want you to type gunicorn space your project name. Now my project is called deployment. So I am just going to come here and type deployment. So it should be gunicorn space your project name dot wsgi colon application. Make sure this deployment is your project's name, whatever name you gave your project. Now, that is why we also needed to install gunicorn, because this is going to be our start command. Render is going to run our project using gunicorn. So just scroll down, and for the instance type, just select free since we are hosting everything. Now, this is the part where we need to add our environment variables. So I'm just going to go back to my env file, and I'm going to copy all of this, and I will go back. Now, instead of typing it one by one manually, I'm just going to click add from .env, and I'm going to paste all those values. So once you paste them, I want you to just click add variables. Now remember that we had created a database earlier, and I said that we are going to be making use of the internal URL later. So I just want you to head to where you have that database in your project. You can just open the dashboard in a new tab as I did. And I want you to click the database. Now I want you to scroll all the way down and copy the internal database URL. Now once you copy that, I want you to head back to where you have your environment variables. And where you have database URL, I want you to replace it with the internal database URL. Now I want you to just click on create web service. Now we are going to get an error when we click create web service. I am going to explain why we are creating that error and why we are getting that error. So Render is trying to currently deploy our project. But during the deployment, I encountered an error. That is because I mistakenly gave my requirements file. I spelled it wrongly. So I am going to go back and rename it properly. So I'll just rename it. It should be requirements.txt. Now, because I made a change, I need to now go back to my GitHub repository, and I need to re-upload this file. So I'm going to go to upload files, and I am going to go and grab the requirements file. And for the commit, I am going to put renamed file properly, and I will click commit changes. Now, after doing that, I want you to head back to your render dashboard. Now, normally, anytime you have a new commit on render, it's going to redeploy immediately from whatever branch you push to. So since I specified that I want to deploy from the main branch, anytime I make a push or a change to the main branch, it's going to automatically redeploy. So now that it has found my requirements file, it has installed all the libraries. Now we are still going to get that error that I specified. That is because we haven't declared what we haven't added this URL to the allowed host, and the deployment is going to crash. Now I'm just going to wait and show you the crashing error so that you understand what it is. So right now, during the deployment, the error has come. It says invalid HTTP host header, render deployments, blah, blah, blah. The URL which render generated for us on the website, it says you may need to add this specific URL to the allowed host. So because this URL which render has generated for us for our project isn't added to the allowed host, if I click it right now, because it isn't added to the allowed host, Django is giving us an error saying it does not recognize this domain. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to environment, and we are going to scroll down, and where we have allowed host, we're just going to put a comma, and I want you to paste the domain that render has given you for your project. Now note that I don't want you to add this HTTPS, as it's going to give an error. It should just be the domain that render has given, and for me it's render-deployment, then this id.onrender.com. So once you click save changes, anytime you make a change to environment variable, render is going to automatically redeploy. So once this redeployment has gone through, everything should work successfully and everything should be working well. So I'm just going to wait for these deployments to go through. So right now it says your service is live and we can see that the deployment worked successfully. So how do we know? I can head back to the URL and I can refresh. So once I refresh, you can see that it's now working. And I can head back to the admin dashboard. And once I head to the admin dashboard, I am just going to log in and create a few books. Now you are seeing this page doesn't have styling because I didn't set up static files. So I'll just put in my username and my password, and I'm going to log into the admin dashboard. So you are seeing this because I didn't add the set up the static files. So I'm going to click add under the books. Now for adding a new book, I'll just put author Greg Horwitz, and for the title, I'll put You Are Next. And I'm going to click save. Now, once I click save, this should reflect in my front end. So once it saves, I'm just going to go back to the base URL. And once I enter that, you can see that the new book is showing. So you have learned how to deploy a Django project to render. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to leave it in the comment section and I am going to reply you. Please subscribe, like, and share. And also, I am trying to build a developer community. There are going to be links to my Discord and to my Telegram channels. So if you want to join the community, please feel free to click the links and join. Thank you for watching and I will see you in the next video.